A central concept is wu wei, or effortless action, and it suggests that often less direct intervention leads to better outcomes. So, for instance, if someone's coming at you with great force, rather than meeting them with great force, you might move with the incoming force, which lessens the impact, and roll with it to throw your opponent off balance. And you see that technique in martial arts. But the way I saw my mother implementing this in her life was in her reaction to other people's bad behavior. I never heard her say, "Oh, I want to give her a piece of my mind," or "Boy, I'll take him to the cleaners." I felt like she viewed people's bad behavior as something that would ultimately lead to their self-destruction without her interference.
Everybody, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter, the author podcast. We get to meet amazing authors from around the world, and you're going to love my guest today. Karin's on the show. We're going to be talking about her journey as an author, all the great things that she's working on. I'm excited to have her here on the podcast. You're going to love her. Karin, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. Glad to have you here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Karin, tell everybody where you are in this great big world of art.
I am in sunny Alameda, California.
That sounds terrible. No, it sounds beautiful. I would love to be there. I'm jealous. I'm so jealous. That's good. What do you love about that part of the world?
It's a little island town in San Francisco Bay. And it feels like it has a small town feel, even though we're in this huge metropolitan area. There's a ton of Victorian homes, and I get to live in one. And there's the beach, there's the estuary, there's boating. So it's a lovely place to live.
Nice. That's great. Sounds gorgeous. I would love to come see that someday. That's great. Is it kind of a touristy area too, or is it pretty kind of like secluded on its own?
It is kind of a hidden secret in a ways. It is not a touristy place.
Okay.
You have to go over little bridges to get there. It's not, there's not a freeway, and there's no public transit that goes directly through it. So other than buses. So no, it's not touristy. So it's this kind of lovely hidden secret in a ways.
Beautiful. I love it. A nice place to live. That's really great. Karin, we have authors that listen to our show here on Living the Next Chapter. They're brand new to writing. They love getting wisdom and knowledge shared to them from an author who's done something they haven't done. You are further down the road than many of the listeners of the show, and they're here to listen. They're here to take notes on what you've learned as an author. I'm really curious, where did all this start for you, your author journey, and what have you learned along the way as you worked on your project?
Yeah, throughout my childhood, my mother told me stories of growing up in her father's Chinese laundry business in Detroit during the infancy of the auto industry in Detroit, and later in a Cantonese village on the eve of the Sino-Japanese War. And she also spoke of what it was like to survive as a teen and young adult live-in domestic worker and a waitress in mid-century California. So these were the stories that I was absorbing as a young child and young person. And there were tales Dickensian in their pathos of those who take advantage of the poor, of family addictions, racism, wartime privations, the perils of marrying too young and then feeling trapped in the marriage. But there were also these stories of the strength of family and the kindness of strangers and the power, as she put it, of fighting for your little slice of happiness in this world before you pass on. And along the way, she revealed history from fascinating perspectives. A woman's perspective, an immigrant daughter's perspective, and a life on the margins. And these stories felt almost mythological to me, because so far removed from my vanilla, comfortable, middle-class upbringing in the San Francisco Bay Area. I actually grew up in a kind of upper-middle-class enclave in a two-bedroom house next to a mansion so large that it extended from one street to the next, so that I felt like Nick Carraway in The Great Gatsby. And how had this transformation happened in a generation when my mother hadn't even been able to finish high school? And that's what I wanted to record. So in 2002, my husband took work in New Zealand, and having some time while he was away, I interviewed my mother, my siblings, my dad, and my sister. And when I took a short sabbatical to join my husband, I began blogging one rough draft chapter at a time. And I could hear my mother's voice so clearly that I wrote it in the first person. And my mom would read these rough draft chapters and she said, gee, I appreciate you writing down these stories. I mean, who else would care? And I said, Mom, these stories are fascinating. This is history, and it's so different from life now and the life that I'm familiar with. So at this point, my publishing journey becomes very circuitous. With the arrival of my second daughter in 2005, I set aside the manuscript with the dream of publishing it someday. And then between raising kids and then caring for aging parents and then the passing of my mother and my grief, it just didn't seem like it was going to happen. And then in 2020, the pandemic arrived and I lost my employment. And I embarked on like a month-long journey of a month-long binge of board games and walks around the neighborhood and too much baking. And then in the silence, I realized someday was here and I needed to start working on my dream. I didn't know anything about publishing. And I was actually a ballet and ballroom instructor at the time. But the universe gave me a little nudge. I met an author, Helen Harris, at my church, who had just published her first novel in her 70s. So that was kind of inspiring. And Helen was my mother's name. So I kind of got a little chill when I was talking to her. And I asked her advice, and she recommended a developmental editor, who is someone who helps you look at the big picture of your story, not grammar and things, but just does the story work? And if so, why not? With that editor's help, I polished the manuscript and pitched it through a Twitter event. If you're not familiar with that, there are these Twitter pitching events throughout the year for different literary genres. And so you can pick an event that fits your genre. And on the appointed day, say from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., you send out however many tweets are allowed. In my case, you get 3 tweets. So you have 280 characters to post a pitch with the hashtag of the event. And literary agents and publishers are looking at these tweets. And if they put a heart on your tweet, that means they're inviting you to send them a more detailed pitch.
Wow.
So I got 2 hearts that day, and they were both from small press publishers. I submitted my manuscript. They both made offers, and I chose one, almost made it to publication, and then that press went out of business due to pandemic stresses. And when they informed me, I didn't reply for like 3 days just from being so bummed and in denial. But then I dusted myself off, and that's when the querying really began. Query number 42 got me another offer from a small press in London. And maybe 42 queries doesn't sound like that much, but because each query is only like 300 words, but each one involves a fair amount of research into does your work actually fit that agent or that publisher and why? And then you need to convince them that it fits their work. And it's a lot of work. But number 42 was my lucky number. It got me an offer from a small press in London. I thought that would be okay because the world is online, like we are here. But I soon realized that their marketing was based in Europe, and they were kind of relying on me to do marketing in the US. In some ways, it was kind of a mismatch. They were interested in the story as a story of the Asian diaspora, but otherwise, in terms of marketing, we were not well matched. So sales really floundered. And still, the book won recognition. It earned a spot on the Kirkus Review's annual list of top 100 indie books.
Wow.
So 2 other things happened at that time. First, I actually started writing professionally because I hadn't been a professional writer before. I started writing for my local news outlet. Second, I became aware of a historical fiction writer, Julia Park Tracy, who I really enjoyed. And I started following her on social media. I happened to be chatting to my boss at the newspaper, and I was lamenting that I wasn't published with a publisher like Julia Park Tracy's. You know, I was like, I really admire her work. I wish I could have that kind of experience. And he said, well, why don't you just reach out to her and see what she thinks, you know? And it's funny how just a little encouragement can go so far, because I'm not sure I would have done that without him suggesting it. And then it was like, yeah, well, why don't I just reach out and nothing bad can happen? Well, she was not only an author, but she was the acquisitions editor for her publisher. So I sent my query. She said, sure, sent a whole manuscript. And then she read it, and then she liked it. And the next thing I knew, they were offering to republish it. And so that's the book that's coming out is this republication. And the difference in my experience has been like night and day because they're based here in California. They're familiar with local opportunities where I can write articles or get in, do book talks. And they represent numerous Bay Area authors. So I feel like I have this little support network. Writing is kind of a lonely thing. And the Bay Area of Sibylline authors, we get together once a month on Zoom and kind of cheer each other on and name our successes and name things that we need help with. And we're able to support each other that way. So I feel like I have been published a little bit through the School of Hard Knocks. I definitely have not had like the Master of Fine Arts experience of publishing, but I'm here and I made it and I'm really happy about that.
That's kind of that's kind of nice to be able to reach out to somebody you admire, and for them to be receptive to work with you, right? Now that's gotta feel really encouraging for you as an author to have that person there for you. That's great.
Yeah, she was really nice.
Wow.
So, yeah,
that's great. That's great. Have you been following her for a while then? Like you've known about her for a while?
For a couple of years, I would say.
A couple of years. Okay.
Not a really long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. So when a book is republished, then is anything changed to the book at all? Is it the same way it was when it was originally published? Is there any changes that happen?
Yeah. Well, I'm a more experienced writer, so I polished the writing somewhat. I also got to add in a few new vignettes. After the first book, my aunt said, why didn't you include the story about, this and that and the other? And I said, you're right. And I didn't include everything that she was suggesting, but there were a few things that was like, you're right. I should put that. So there were a little few extra vignettes. The cover is new and beautiful, and they formatted it better. There's photographs throughout, which is nice, so that as you're going through the story, you see my mom and her family, and as they progressed from the 1920s.
So for the readers that are listening, Karin, who would this be a great book for? If you could kind of pinpoint the ideal reader for this story and for this book, do you have somebody in mind that you're like, I envision my reader to be this type of person? Who is that?
If you like historical, sort of creative nonfiction, I loved the Little House on the Prairie books, where you learned about how women and girls lived their everyday lives. This is a nice book for that. If you like immigrant stories, they're kind of epic, because I think immigrant stories often are. It's also working class. It's life on the margins. I would say I'm a proud granddaughter of farmers and laundry workers, and the proud daughter of a waitress and a school teacher. They get things done. They're resilient people. They've got a great work ethic. They're the salt of the earth. And this is my mom's story. So it's one of those stories for, the everyday person. Yeah. Sort of like, it's almost like historical fiction, except it's true. So it's like creative nonfiction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. In the process of writing it, what's an example of a story or something you came across in the process and you're like, I never knew this about my family, about my mother, something that was really interesting for you as you were kind of doing your research?
Well, gosh, there were so many things. I hesitate. I'm hesitating because this is such a dark story, the one that sort of popped into my head. There was a point. Well, I'm sorry, let me back up. One of the things that really moves me is not just the historical detail, but the status of women in this story.
Yeah.
My grandmother would not forgo, even though she was having chronic health problems, she would not forgo having children until she had born a son. because she felt like she didn't really have status or pride of place until she had borne the heir of the family. And she kept having girls, and they were very poor.
Yeah.
And at one point, I think when the third daughter was born, my grandfather actually said, "Girls and more girls, we should just put this one under a blanket and let her suffocate."
Mm.
And, when I heard this story, when you come from a first world culture, it's unbelievable. It's like you
Yeah.
can't even imagine, like, what is the thought process? Where did this even come from? And I looked into that and come to find out that infanticide has this really long history. Um, it- China had been stable for 6 centuries before the 19th century, and hardly anyone emigrated. But starting in the 19th century, they got hit with everything. There was opium and natural disasters and population explosion and wars and revolution. And there was no social safety net. There was no trusty food bank or government benefits, and everyone was in desperate circumstances where they were. And I realized my grandfather was repeating the survival wisdom of his ancestors. He was born in the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, he did not follow through with it. It was a passing fit of anger and a blowing off of steam, a saying of something that probably he had heard, I'm sure.
Yeah.
That did not happen. So I will just relieve everyone's anxiety about that. But that was, coming from the first world again and growing up in my comfortable little middle class environment was shocking. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that's the other thing about history. I think when we don't study history, we don't learn from history, then we're apt to possibly repeat elements of history in some form or another, right? And I think when we hear stories like your family's story, there's a lot of lessons baked into retelling these stories that can really help people to get context, to appreciate how difficult it was to live back then and all of the struggles that we don't see today. Like for me, you talked about laundry and having a laundry business. I have a washing machine and a dryer. It's 20 feet from me. I can go do laundry anytime I want. Right. So to know that that was somebody's entire career and that's what they served their community, and that brought them joy and a sense of accomplishment to do that for people. You're like, oh yeah, like you almost forget, right? Because we just see the world through today's eyes.
I would say it didn't bring them joy, but it brought them a livelihood.
A livelihood, yeah.
Yeah. There's a whole story around why the Chinese were often in the laundry business at that time. It's just like so many immigrant jobs. It's kind of something that other people didn't want to do. Yeah. So, if nobody else in the first class of people want to do it, like, okay, we'll let you do it, kind of a thing. So, yeah, it offered a livelihood. Yeah.
Interesting. So mostly centered around Detroit, Michigan, then, the story?
No. So when my grandmother died suddenly, my grandfather brought the entire family, 6 children, back to his ancestral village in China and left the kids there with the new stepmother, who was arranged by a matchmaker. She deserves her own book. He left the kids there with her while he went back to the U.S. to pay down the medical bills that had accumulated from his first wife's long health issues, and then to earn enough money to bring the kids back one at a time or 2 at a time. This was the Great Depression, so money was hard to come by. Years went by before each 1 or 2 kids was coming back. It was a long process.
Wow.
Yeah, and so in the meantime, also the Sino-Japanese War broke out, and so they were living through that. And so there's a section of the book that is about the village in China. And this also I find fascinating because they had been very poor in the United States, but they had plumbing, a telephone, electricity, sometimes access to a doctor when they could pay for one. And there were none of these in the village. There were outhouses and oil wick candles and communication by letter and old wives' tales for health care. And so imagine that you've been living this first world life, even if it was, not the high life, but it was a life. And then you go back, you go to this third world situation and you're there for years. And so that is a section of the book. Then eventually my mother was the oldest, so she was the first to be able to return. And she returned when she was 16 years old by herself in the middle of the war. So that was an exciting adventure, getting out of China in the middle of war with 0 planes flying overhead. And just one of the things that struck me about that journey to go from China back to the U.S. was the kindness of strangers. I mean, here's a kid on the way. She could have so been taken advantage of. So many bad things could have happened. And yet some people really stepped up for her. They were complete strangers at critical moments and made it possible for her to arrive safely. One of the people was an English gentleman in Hong Kong. So she got to Hong Kong. Her uncle took her down to the ticket office and they said, "Oh, no tickets, come back some other time." And he was going, "Oh, all right, okay. I guess, Helen, you're just going to, that was her American name, or Ying, her Chinese name. I guess you're just going to have to wait." So everybody in the family goes off to work. She has nothing to do. She's sitting on the front porch, and there's an Englishman, a surveyor, on the street with his translator. And she's a cute kid, I guess. And he said to the translator, "Why don't you ask her what her name is?" And she just answered him. She said, "My name is Helen." And he was so surprised because he was like, "How do you speak English?"
Yeah.
And she told the story of how she had grown up in the U.S. and what happened and why she returned. And then she was really excited to say, "And now my dad sent money so I can go home." And he's great. So he was working out on the street for a week or something like that. And after a while he said, why haven't you gone yet? And he said, "Oh, we go down to the ticket office and they say they don't have any tickets." And he went, "Let me talk to your uncle when he gets home." And so he took them down to the ticket office and he said, "I need to buy a ticket for this young lady." And they just sold him a ticket right away. And they realized that they're expecting a bribe or a tip or something like that. And her uncle didn't realize that. And of course she didn't realize that. And so just by going a little out of his way, he got her that ticket so she could get on the ship. Then she arrived in Angel Island, which was the immigration place on the West Coast. And her paperwork wasn't in order. So they said, "We're going to have to detain you here in the immigrant detention center." And she's like, "Well, what happens if this doesn't get cleared up?" And then she goes, "Well, we could deport you." So in a panic, before she got off the ship, there was the Chinese cook who was on deck. And she said, "I need you can you help me get a message to my uncle in Chinatown?" Because she had no way of contacting him to let him know that she was there. And he said, "Yes, I will." So she wrote the address, she wrote a letter, quick note. And this cook didn't have to do this, but he hand delivers this message to her uncle in Chinatown. The uncle wired, for the paperwork, got it sent to the immigrant detention center. And, within less than 2 days, then she was released. But if she hadn't been able to get this message to him, I mean, we don't have cell phones, all of this. So there were just people that kind of stepped up along the way and really helped her out. And I find it heartwarming because a lot of dark things that happen, but then there's these just really nice things that happened too.
And at the age of 16.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think if as a parent listening with a 16-year-old in your house, the thought of your child at that age traveling that far on their own around strangers I don't think a lot of parents would be up for that today, sending their kids somewhere like that, right? So that's a total adventure just to travel
Right.
to get to the States, right?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. That's another book right there almost, just that.
Yeah.
Just wow.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
And then the last part of the book is her experiences. Because by 17, she was on her own. She got to stay with her aunts for a year. And then they were like, we have our own kids, we have our own lives. Here, why don't you be an au pair for a family and then you can live with them and they'll give you a little salary. So by 17, she was doing that and she was on her own. And, she was a kid still, pretty uneducated. English was kind of a second language, even though she spent part of her childhood here. And you kind of hear the shabby way that people treat the lowest person in the household in the privacy of their homes, unfortunately.
Right.
And that was also true for some of my aunts. That's how they also, when they came back, they got started as live-in domestic workers. And then, so my mom quickly figured out, or not too quickly, but within a year or so, figured out that this was not a good thing. And so she ended up becoming a waitress. And then that's what she did for until she was 70, unbelievably.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
But she worked her way up to some really nice establishments, some famous restaurants like the Tonga Room in San Francisco, probably, not the place that in Canada, but in San Francisco, it's like a kind of well-known restaurant even today. It's a tiki Polynesian style restaurant. And
Oh.
yeah, but she took a lot of pride actually in providing excellent service.
So working on the book and capturing these stories, how much of a joy was it for you to have time with your mother to kind of talk about some of these things and relive this and have her give you some of these stories? Like, that's got to be a meaningful interaction with your mother as well.
It really was. I am so happy that I recorded these stories because she's gone now.
Yeah.
And I learned so much just approach to life. I'll say something about the title if that's okay.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Or yeah. My mother would not have described herself as a Taoist, but the book's title was inspired by a verse from the Tao Te Ching, which is the founding document of Taoism. Taoism is a Chinese philosophy based on the writings of Lao Tzu, a 6th century BC philosopher who emphasized living in harmony with the Tao, sometimes called the Way, which is an underlying spiritual force of the universe. And I always kind of giggle when I have watched The Mandalorian and they go, this is the way. And I got to think of, Taoism. Anyway, Taoism and Confucianism obviously were influential in her culture. And when I read the Tao Te Ching as an adult, I was really struck by how closely the philosophy aligned with her approach to life. A central concept is wu wei, or effortless action, and it suggests that often less direct intervention leads to better outcomes. So, for instance, if someone's coming at you with great force, rather than meeting them with great force, you might move with the incoming force, which lessens the impact, and roll with it to throw your opponent off balance. And you see that technique in martial arts.
Right.
But the way I saw my mother implementing this in her life was in her reaction to other people's bad behavior. I never heard her say, oh, I want to give her a piece of my mind, or boy, I'll take him to the cleaners. I felt like she viewed people's bad behavior as something that would ultimately lead to their self-destruction without her interference. She preferred to disengage and remain focused on her path and sort of flow around them. When she was going through a divorce, for instance, most of her in-laws quietly withdrew from her because she was no longer part of the family. But one sister-in-law, in a fit of spite, poured sugar into her gas tank, damaging her car. And yes, amazingly, my mother chose not to retaliate. She was upset, but she viewed it as sort of the parting blow of a really painful relationship and as a further impetus to make a fresh start, to kind of bump her into a fresh start. She and her sister-in-law lived on the same block of a poor neighborhood in Oakland, and she started shopping for a new home. There is a verse in the Tao Te Ching that says, water is fluid, soft, yielding, but water will wear away rock. What is soft is strong. And that so reminded me of my mother. She didn't wield sword power, but she persisted forever and a day, flowing around or over or seeping through the cracks. So here she is as a divorced minority woman in about 1960. It feels like trying to procure a home in a better neighborhood is almost impossible. I mean, she could get a place in the ghetto. Even though she had her 20% down payment, steady employment, the first realtor took her to see homes, and she never got to see the insides because the realtor would have her wait outside, and he goes, I'm going to talk to the owner and see if they're willing to sell to Chinese. And the answer was always no. And so the same experience repeated with a second realtor. A third realtor wouldn't even show her around. She went to a fourth realtor, and this realtor sort of successfully pleaded her case to a more sympathetic seller who was willing to give her a chance. And with so much gratitude, she moved into this nice home in a good neighborhood where she felt safe, raising my older sister. And so it was like persistence, persistence, persistence. I'll never forget when I graduated high school, she brought out a stack of mutual fund statements and that dated back 18 years to when I was born. And the first entry was that she had opened the account with $100. And then 6 months later, she added $10. And then 2 months later, she added $25. And eventually it became monthly. And then the amounts grew larger. And by the time I graduated, it was enough to cover my college education, which was one of her dreams. She wanted to see her daughters educated. And I just sat there thinking about how many years had gone into the planning of this moment, you know. And that was her strength, you know, just her persistence and focus. And so that's the reason for the title of the book, The Strength of Water.
Where I live near Niagara Falls, and I see the strength of water from that point of view, right? And as I listen to you, Karin, my mind goes to where I live, and I see it. That powerful water that is soft, and flows around, but also wears down anything that comes in its way. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, what a great visual, though, too, about how to react when pressures or things come at you and not trying to equal it. That's so powerful. I'm going to have to think about this for a while because I think in our lives, I think our natural reaction is to meet force with force.
Right.
But I love how you describe that, and that's such a powerful thought. I really love that you shared that.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's amazing. And one thing I asked of you, and you graciously said yes to, was to read a little portion to our audience from the book to give us a little taste of what we're going to get as readers. And I'm really looking forward to this. Can you set up a little bit about what we're going to hear from the book?
Well, I don't really have to do much setup because I thought I'd read the prologue. So
okay, great.
This is the very opening of the book.
Good.
In my heyday, I was a bit over 5 feet tall. Today, I am 4 feet 8 inches. I am a little person, but I have lived a big life. China, the country of my heritage, traded silk for gold with Rome and Carthage. And millennia after the Roman Empire and Carthage fell, China still endures. I like to think of myself that way. I did not have much formal education or encouragement as I grew up. Some believe my ways are a little backward, but I have persisted. During my life, I have been criticized as sometimes too boisterous, sometimes too quiet, sometimes not smart enough, or sometimes not big enough. Still, as long as I try my best, I know I have value and am deserving. The most important thing I have looked for is an appreciation for who I am, which is hard to find in the world. Cultural and educational barriers are difficult to overcome. Those we love most are sometimes our greatest detractors. However, where once I shared 2 rooms with 8 family members, now I live in a hilltop home with a view of San Francisco. Where once I did not have the opportunity to finish high school, now both my daughters have college degrees. Where once I was alone and lonely, now I have family and friends. This is my story.
For everyone, when you buy the book from Karin, I would love for you to press play on that section again and have Karin read you the prologue, because you have the book in your hands now and you can hear Karin read it to you. I think that's pretty powerful. Wow, I feel like through the conversation today, Karin, that I have a small little introduction to your mother. And she sounds like a character. She sounds like someone who would be very entertaining to tell stories and hear stories from. Sounds like a woman to be very proud of.
Thank you. I really am. I really am.
Yeah. It's amazing. Karin, where can people go to follow you as an author and to know more about your journey, to know more about the books that you're writing and all the things you're up to? I'd love to kind of send people towards you. Where should we send the listener?
I have a blog. It's Karin, spelled Karin, K, middle initial, Jensen, JENSEN.blog.
Okay.
And there's information about the book. There's my occasional blogs. I'm going to be adding an events page and some other information on there.
The book is coming out in November, the early part of November for everybody listening. My podcast is called Living the Next Chapter. So I like to ask this, Karin, once the book is settled in and you're excited that it's been re-released and we're so excited for you, are you going to continue writing? What's next for you? Are you living your next chapter?
You know, I have a daughter who is an Academy of Art student in San Francisco, and she actually asked if I could write it as a screenplay. I don't know if it would become a film, but she said, Mom, if you write it as a screenplay, I could make it into a graphic novel, because a screenplay is very visually oriented. It will give me the visual cues. And she said she was interested in doing that. So I'm hoping that actually works out. That would be a fun project to work on with my daughter and to pass the stories on to the next generation.
Well, the thing is, you never know who's listening to this as well. So there might be somebody that'd be really interested to have a conversation about that with you, who can maybe make this more of a reality for you and your daughter as well. So let's keep that in mind.
All right. Thank you.
Excellent. Everyone, all the information, as always, in the show notes. You have a lot to think about. I think you should go back and re-listen to this episode a second time, because there is so much great information in here and something that will really challenge you on how you're going to live your life this week. I think we could all learn from Karin's mother in this story. Karin, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I truly appreciate it.
Hey, thank you so much again for pressing play. As you've heard, great guests on the show. And one thing you didn't hear in this conversation is what? What did you not hear? Think about it for a second. That's right. Not a single solitary commercial for a mattress or a supplement or a whatever you call it. No. Why? Because we don't want to break up the conversation with commercials. So the fact that you're still here means that you are a fan of the show, I'm assuming. So if you want to help to keep the podcast going and to make me feel really happy, all I really care about is coffee, okay? I just got to be honest. I love coffee. I'm drinking one right now. It's starting to get cold. I need to warm it up. Helping us with our Buy Me a Coffee link over at livingthenextchapter.com and also in the show notes helps kind of keep the lights on around here. Remember, I'm doing this for free. I'm paying for everything. So I would love to have a little coffee donation, even $5. Kind of fills up my cup, and I would love to enjoy a coffee from you. So if you're interested, again, thank you for listening, but you can use our Buy Me a Coffee link and fill up the cup. Thanks for being here.